All right, we are on to part 10. So, little warning, I know for a fact that somewhere in this part I'm going to be getting very loud. So, if you're wearing headphones, you have been warned. All right, let's go. This was the first time I'd ever woke with such clarity. It was 5:59, just moments before my alarm would go off. I was amazed at the precision of my internal clock. I had made preparations for the next day of school before I went to bed. I changed quickly and descended to the deserted lower floor. It appeared that my mom was still asleep. Neither breakfast nor lunch was ready. Yesterday, I just unilaterally declared that I would be leaving early today, so it couldn't be helped. I slathered jam on some bread and topped it with instant cocoa. Just as I was finishing up breakfast, Mom rose groggily from her slumber.
あら、ケイチ、今日は早いのね。学校の行事か何か？
別に。
Answering bluntly, I picked up my bag and stood after stuffing 2 slices of bread down my throat.
もう行くの？お弁当は？もうちょっと待ってくれないとできないわよ。
If I waited for her to make my lunch, then it would end up being the same time as usual. If I did that, it would raise the chances of me running into Rena and Mion on the way. Yes, from today onwards, I was going to school alone.
今日はいいよ。
じゃあお昼はどうするの？
抜け出して商店で菓子パンでも買うよ。
そう。じゃあこれ、お昼代ね。ちゃんとレシート持ってくるのよ。
I took the 1,000 yen bill from Mom and slipped it into my pocket.
こんなに早いけど、レナちゃんたちもこんなに早いの？
いや、俺だけ。
レナちゃんには早く出るって伝えてあるの？
I have no reason to tell her every little detail now, do I? Finding it difficult answering the onslaught of questions, I made an annoyed face.
レナが来たら、ケイチは先に行ったって伝えてよ。
ちょっとケイチ、待ちなさい。
It's not that I didn't trust my parents. I just couldn't rely on them. They couldn't help me. I could only hope that they didn't get involved. It was safer that way. My mom's annoying voice was cut off by the slam of the door. For the first time since I moved here, I headed down the road to school alone. Up until now, I had always walked down the same path at the same time each day. So I always met with the same people at the same places. But today was different. I didn't meet the people I would normally, and nobody was at the places where I would have normally met them. Of course, Rena wasn't in the spot where we usually met, and there wasn't anyone at the spot where we would have met up with Mion. The length of the tree's shadows, the morning air, and the brightness of the sun, it was a completely different type of morning from what I was used to. Without a doubt, it felt strange. It left me with the impression that I had destroyed the illusion Hiyamizawa had set up for me before it had enough time to prepare all of the props it needed to deceive me.
あら、ケイチくん。今朝は早いわね。みんなで早朝から待ち合わせ？
The person who called out to me was someone we always passed by as they were taking a walk along the edge of the fields. Their name was, I forgot. Of course, this wasn't the same spot where we usually passed each other.
今朝は早くに目が覚めちゃったので、気分転換なんです。あまり気にしないでください。
I threw out a random excuse.
レナちゃんやミオンちゃんはどうしたんだい？今日は一人なの？
ええ、まあ。
I was being asked the same type of questions my mom was asking. So I answered them in the same uninteresting, vague manner. It wasn't funny being asked where Rena was each time I passed by someone. But maybe it was to be expected. It was because for so long we were always together so amicably. Even I felt that if I let my guard down, we could still be Stop it, Keiichi. Don't think about that anymore. You spent all day yesterday thinking about how dangerous it was to go soft, didn't you? Beep beep beep. A car horn blared from out of nowhere. Even though I was walking, lost in thought, that horn was way too close. A mechanical behemoth barreled at me from behind, catching me completely off guard. By the time I turned around, the van's hulking chassis was almost on top of me. I'd seen plenty of cars veer to the opposite shoulder to avoid pedestrians, but this car was doing the opposite. It felt like there was somebody on the opposite shoulder, and the van was swerving in my direction to avoid them. That blissfully ignorant train of thought delayed me from realizing something much, much more important. That large mass was hurtling right at me. Was it going to hit me? The inside of my head instantly flooded with a painfully cold liquid. In that moment, the scene before me, no, time itself, had frozen. In the silence of that frozen moment, I compared the van, so close that I had no way to dodge it, and my body, the upper half twisted awkwardly in order to look behind me. There was no way I could dive out of the way in my current position. If I lost focus now, this moment would unpause, and I would probably be plowed over, caught in this silly pose. Bend my upper body over towards the paddy by the side of the road. If I bent far enough, I'd get away with just being hit by the side view mirror. As soon as the thought crossed my mind, the temporal stasis was shattered by the deafening sound of the van. The side mirror struck my shoulder, sending me spinning off through the air like a top, locked in my contorted position. Splash! Sent tumbling through the air, I crashed into the muddy paddy by the side of the road. My entire body was soiled and drenched. But the choice I had made that instant was unmistakably for the best. I was covered in mud, but when the alternative was being hit by the car, it was the closest I could be to being unscathed. Rising out from the paddy, I had enough in me to glare over at the stopped van and yell profanities at the driver. I'm not sure if he was able to see me, but the van sped off suddenly.
待てよクソこれってひき逃げって言うんじゃねえのかよ
I couldn't help but continue yelling out profanities. The disgrace from being covered in mud hurt me more than any physical wounds. I slogged through the muddy paddy and made my way back onto the road.
これって犯罪じゃねえのかよちくしょう
Shit! I'll track you down and sue you! If I go looking for a van, I'm sure to find it in this little village. The path I was on had rice paddies on either side, and it had become so narrow that one car could barely fit through. It wasn't a place you could tear full speed down in a car, let alone pass by pedestrians. Not only was it a narrow road, but the car just now was closer to my side of the road than the other when it went past me. Even as I cursed, I was desperately trying to suppress the dark cloud roiling up within me. This wasn't just a hit and run. That car just now was trying to run me over, wasn't it? Thinking back, I did feel like there had been a car creeping up on me slowly for a while now. That's right. As soon as I'd parted ways with the person taking a walk, I had had that feeling the whole time. If it had wanted to pass me, then it had no shortage of chances. Normally, I would have felt suspicious and turned around sooner. But I was lost in thought, and now was kicking myself for not realizing it was there sooner. And then, when the path had become narrow and there was no one else in sight, he floored it. If I had hesitated for even a moment, the result would have been no laughing matter. As the adrenaline rush from nearly being run over subsided, and the realization of just how terrifying the preceding events were sunk in, There was no doubt about it. That van was intentionally trying to hit me. A cold, viscous sweat seeped from my scalp and slid down my back before dribbling off. I struggled to avoid falling into a panic. There was still the possibility that this was really just an accident. Calm down, Keiichi. But also don't be so naive, Keiichi. Being that lax will get you killed the next time. You need to always be on your toes. Don't give them any openings. If my enemy was really out to kill me, the next time, they would use a more reliable method. If that time came, and I was acting like I was now, getting covered in mud was the price I had paid for my own naivete. Covered in mud, but without injury. Not even a sprain. I guess this is what you would call the silver lining. I began walking again, this time cautiously. I wouldn't even show a hint of carelessness. I had suspected only Rena and the others up until now. No, it was because I had suspected them that I had believed there were no other enemies. Oishi-san had said so, didn't he? There was the possibility of a village conspiracy. Was I really mired so deeply in the situation that I had no choice but to try and carry on as usual? Wouldn't it be safest just to hole up inside my house? But the moment I abandoned my regular routine, everyone around me would abandon theirs as well. That was just too horrifying of a thought. I recalled the tales Oishi-san had told me of when Hinamizawa was still called Onikakushi. A frightening tale of an entire village of demons hunting their prey, surrounding them and eating them alive. One must not interfere with the demons. One must pretend not to see it. The enemy were numerous, the whole village. The villagers, with their unwavering faith in the curse, would do nothing to help me. The strong sudden flash of sunshine made me slightly dizzy. I had no idea what was going on anymore. When I suspected it was the work of man, I would catch a glimpse of Oyashiro-sama's curse. And when I suspected it was Oyashiro-sama's curse, someone would poke their head out. What was coincidence? What was intentional? Who was my enemy? Who was just a bystander? No, what I really, truly wanted to know was, how did I end up with the proverbial bullseye painted on my back? Eventually, an answer in a form I could understand will appear. I don't care when that will happen, because until then, I cannot die. That alone fueled my resolve to fight and will keep me alive. I remembered seeing the metal bat in the gym storage shed, but there was a padlock on the door barring my entry. At the very least, I wanted to get my hands on it before everyone else arrived at school. I circled around the school grounds impatiently. But all I could find were things like pieces of lumber, nothing that I could bring into the classroom easily. Then, I had an epiphany. I should search inside the classroom. If it was something in the classroom to begin with, then there wouldn't be a problem. I could tell that everyone's indoor shoes were still in their lockers. Good thing I came early. Nobody else was here yet. I wondered, what could I find in the classroom? I didn't think I could find an especially effective weapon like a bat. But it couldn't be helped at this point. Until the gym storage shed was open, I needed to find a substitute. A lingering hint of naivete whispered that there was no way I'd be attacked at school. But such soft ideas would no longer protect me. To think that they were slowly making their way into parts of my life that I had once thought impenetrable. In the worst case, my own house might not be safe anymore. That was an incredibly frightening thought. But I believe that not considering the worst case scenario would have been even more frightening. Anyways, I will survive. So long as I lived, then I will definitely be able to escape this labyrinth of nonsense. Definitely. My exploration of the classroom came to an impasse. That much was to be expected. There was no way there would be anything that could be a weapon in the classroom. In case of emergency, there was probably nothing I could do but swing my own chair around. My gaze landed on the lockers that had come to be used for personal storage. The locker that Mion used to store her pile of games was among them. There was one for each person in the class, all lined up. Of course, there was one for me as well. Oh yeah, there was supposed to still be a tracksuit in my locker. Seeing me covered in mud would be strange. I should go change later. But first, I needed a weapon. If one of my classmates came, it would be hard to rummage through all the lockers. I swiftly began opening the lockers one by one. They were mostly just filled with things like gym clothes, personal items, and umbrellas. An umbrella. If I couldn't find anything better, then this would have to be my weapon. I was about to give up on finding anything decent when I opened a locker that held exactly what I wanted. It was, without a doubt, a metal bat. It was well worn and pretty beaten up, but there was no doubt it was usable. In that locker that reeked of mold, there also hung a baseball uniform. It was probably the locker of a student in a Pee-wee league or something like that. If that was the case, then he'd probably ask for it back. At that time, I could hear the voices of the children scuffling their way noisily in from the hallway. Amongst them, I could make out Rika-chan and Satoko.
おはようございますです。あらあらあら、今朝はお早いですわね、ケイチさん。
I nonchalantly hid the bat I was holding behind my back.
なんなんですのその身なりは。泥だらけでしたよ。
ああ、まあちょっとあってな。すぐ着替えるから勘弁しろ。
With that said, I began taking off my clothes. Satoko began to blush, just as I expected her to.
レディーの前でお着替えなんてしつけがなってませんことよ。
着替えをじーっと見てるレディもしつけがなってないと思うぞ。男子は更衣室がないんだから諦めろ。
As Satoko feigned disgust, she went into the hall, still blushing. Conversely, Rika-chan continued to stare at me, preparing to change.
リカちゃんもレディなら着替えを見てるのは良くないと思うぞ。
僕はレディーじゃないですからいいのです。
She deliberately pouted and looked at me with upturned eyes.
じゃあリカちゃんも今からレディだ。
レディーなら仕方ありませんです。
Rika-chan, appearing to be satisfied with being considered a lady, made her way to join Satoko in the hallway. Just as I breathed a sigh of relief, Rika-chan stopped suddenly and turned back towards me.
ケイチは野球を始めますですか？
It seemed that Rika-chan had noticed the bat.
ああ、ちょっとさ、体がなまってさ、ちょっと素振りでも始めようかなってな。
健康に気を使うのはとても良いことだと思いますです。
She was talking like an old lady, despite her appearance. After saying that, Rika-chan started to leave again, but stopped and looked back at me once more.
そのバットなくさないでくださいねです。
It seemed she already knew I took it out of someone's locker. There was no name on the locker door. I didn't know whose bat it was, but I would be borrowing it until they complained. It wouldn't be for long, just until the gym storage shed was opened. After quickly changing into the tracksuit, I checked the time. I still had plenty of time before class began, because I came so early. I took the bat in one hand and went out to the schoolyard. That was, of course, to practice my swing. I needed to make it known I would always have a bat on me so I could practice my swing. At some point, the sunlight had become even stronger. Disregarding my classmates as they made their way to school, I took my position in the shadow of the school building. I wasn't the academic type, and I wasn't much of an athlete either. I might get muscle pain if I just suddenly started swinging. I should at least start out with some warm-ups. I doubt anyone would think I was doing something out of the ordinary, which was the exact opposite of my actual mental state. I gripped the bat and swung lightly. The bat was by no means light. The weight of it would make it a reliable weapon when I needed it to be. Of course, I could only pray that the moment I needed to use this as a weapon would never come. Just carrying it around could deter attacks against me. At least, that's what I hoped.
あれケイちゃんあんた何やってんの？
Being bombarded with such a hysterical voice, I jumped.
ああ、ケイチくん、野球部だよ。野球部だよ。
It was Rena and Mion.
先に行ったって言われて驚いたけど、ケイちゃん、あんた何やってるわけ？
見てわからないかよ。素振りだよ。甲子園だよ。別にダイエットでもいいぞ。
ダイエットってケイちゃん、そんなに太ってたっけ？
ああ、知らなかったろ。実は三段腹なんだ。もちもちでタプタプなんだぞ。もちもちでタプタプ。レナ、変な想像しなくていいぞ。
To disrupt Rena from imagining something that vulgar, I ruffled her hair messily.
じゃあまあ、頑張って県大会を目指してちょうだいよ。おじさん応援してるわ。野球部の強い高校教えよっか。そこにいる左腕の亀田くんがすごいピッチャーなんだけどさ。頑張ってね。
Seems they've already taken me for a baseball nut, but oh well. Well, if I really did make it to the championship, it would be a cinch. After all, I'd be the pitcher and catcher. I'd pitch the ball, then run past that ball I just threw, and change over to being the catcher in a burst of super incredible explosive speed. I laughed dryly at the ludicrous image. Coming back to my senses, I smashed the bat against the ground.
くそ、何笑ってんだよ、俺。
I pounded the ground over and over. With each impact, the reverberation traveling through the bat stung my hands. If they smile at me like that, I'll... Don't allow anyone close to me. Don't trust anyone. No matter how many times I tell myself that. If they made me smile like that, I'll... I already knew quite well that there were demons dwelling in my smiling friends. But I just couldn't believe it. Did that kind of split personality really exist? Like how Rena confessed to the doctor? Were they simply being possessed by Oyashiro-sama? In other words, did a supernatural being like Oyashiro-sama really exist? And was it possessing everyone to try and kill me? Yeah, that would be wonderful. If only everyone were actually my friends all along, and everything was all just Oyashiro-sama's fault.
前原圭一のバカ野郎！だから！
I yelled out, drawing all the power from the pit of my stomach, and raised the bat violently into the air.
甘えるんじゃねえ！
As I screamed out with all my might, I beat the metal bat into the ground over and over. With every impact, my weakness was being beaten down. Smash. Forget. Smash. Don't be soft. Smash. Know your enemy. Smash. Like hell I'd let them kill me. My shoulders heaving up and down from my ragged breathing, I heard the first bell ring just as I calmed down. I gasped with the sudden realization. That was the final bell. As I felt all the tension drain from me, I let out a deep breath. My mind was in a muddled state for much of the entire day. I didn't feel like I was awake, but it didn't feel like I was asleep either. I couldn't say it felt especially comfortable, but I felt a kind of relief that the sanctity of the school part of my daily life had yet to be violated. How long would I have to keep on living like this? I could only grit my teeth and bear with it as this living hell slowly gnawed away at me.
ケイチくん、やろうやろう。部活の時間なんだよ。だよ。
The sound of Rena's voice brought me back to my senses.
ほらほら、ケイちゃん、ぼーっとしない。机を寄せて寄せて。
Everyone was moving their desks together as usual. That's right, it was happy fun club time. But I had no intention of taking part. I haphazardly stuffed the contents of my desk into my bag as I prepared to go home. It was a weak-handed gesture to avoid having to actually say, I'll be going home now.
なんだよ、ケイちゃん。今日も直帰なわけ？
Myeon sounded quite disappointed.
気分が乗らないんだ。しばらくほっといてくんないかな。
The tone of the words that spilled from my mouth matched Myeon's disapproving glare. It felt like the air in the room had dried out. Satoko looked like she was about to say something, but perhaps dissuaded by the mood, she swallowed her words and stayed silent. Nobody said a thing. I took that to mean I could leave if I wanted. But the collective gaze of the four of them, like the tiny pins used to mount an insect in a display, held me in place. Rena was the one who cut through the heavy mood.
ケイチくん、やっぱり女の子と一緒に遊ぶのなんか嫌だったかな？かな？
She said it in such a melancholic tone that it sent a wave of pain racing through my heart. If this pain was going to kill me, I wanted it to be the soft part of me that could still feel pain. I tore at my chest, violently tearing out the pins that held me in place.
そういうわけじゃねえよ。
I'd only be hurting myself by saying anything more, so I swallowed my words. Cutting things off there, I turned away and exited the classroom. They didn't speak a word to me as I left. It was a long, dull trip back home, but I didn't lose focus. I firmly squeezed the grip of the bat, which was already soggy from sweat. Realizing that, I wiped it down with my sleeve. If something were to happen, I wouldn't want it to be slippery. Since this morning, I'd become especially sensitive to the presence of cars. Even while walking, my ears pricked up and sought out threatening sounds and presences that could be closing in. And that was why I could hear it. Without a doubt, there were footsteps. Those footsteps had matched up perfectly with mine for a while now. From what I could sense, it was just one person. But I had no intention of being careless. Did they intend to follow me like that car this morning until we were in a good location to assault me? Then it wasn't a good idea to keep walking like this. I stopped walking and looked back. The wooded path crowded with trees responded with silence, as if there was nobody there to begin with. But I wouldn't be fooled. I was certain footsteps were following me. And just as I stopped, the footsteps stopped as well. Meaning, the person following me wanted to keep their distance. That was, without a question, proof that I was their target. I held my breath, waiting for that presence to panic and start moving again. The trees rustled with the sound of the wind. The Higurashi also joined in the dissonant chorus, trying to throw my focus into disarray. Had 5 minutes passed? Or had I been like this for a whole 30 minutes? It was so hard to breathe that I might have suffocated. It seemed I would be the first one to panic. Without a doubt, He was lurking in the shade of that tree with bated breath. Then, I'd make the first move. I fixed my grip on the bat. I raised it up to my shoulder to be ready to swing it at any time.
おい、いるんだろそこに。
With all of my might, I screamed at whoever was hiding in the shade of the trees. But the presence in the shade didn't budge. Until the moment I found them, they had no intention of revealing themselves.
分かってんだよ。そこにいるのはよ。
I screamed out angrily at them, but even still, they didn't move at all. Then I'll go over there myself. With all due vigilance, I approached, step by step. Stepping into the tree's shadow, I saw a human figure there. That figure was curled up like a small animal.
レナ、
When she realized I had found her, her expression softened. She seemed apologetic, but wasn't going to speak a word.
なんか俺に用かよ。
I wouldn't accept that silence and screamed the question at her.
別にその
Rena was in a panic with tears welling up in her eyes. But it was obvious that she had been following me.
部活はどうしたんだよ。
ケイチ君がお休みしたからレナもお休み。
関係ないだろ。俺なんか気にしないで遊んでろよ。
だってケイチ君のこと心配で。
Thinking about how I'd been acting up until now, it wasn't hard to imagine that my behavior could have been perceived as strange. So Rena was concerned. At a quick glance, that's how it would seem. But I wasn't going to let my guard down that easily. Even if that was really the case, she still wouldn't have to do something like try to tail me. She should have called out to me when I was leaving and gone out right with me. But Rena didn't do that. She kept her distance from me and matched my walking speed. On top of that, she matched the sound of her footsteps and deviously tried to hide her presence from me. Then, after she realized I noticed she was there, she held her breath as she tried hiding from me. She wore a timid expression that would force one to take pity on her, but without a doubt, she was tailing me.
もうついてくんなよ。
Still glaring at Rena, I continued walking onwards. After I'd walked for a bit, she ignored my command and began walking again. So I yelled at her once more.
ついてくるなって言ってるだろ。
だってレナの家も同じ方向だし。
じゃあレナが先を歩けよ。レナが見えなくなったら俺も歩く。
I moved out of the way and waved my bat violently to urge her forward.
レナはケイチ君と一緒に帰りたいな。
Making a pitiful expression, she meekly squeaked out the words in a voice that she knew would cut into my heart. That agitated me to no end. I knew it was a lie. If you wanted to go home together, then you should have called out to me. Now you're just blurting out random lies.
ごめんなさいごめんなさい。
It seemed that the seething anger within me was written all over my face. Even without saying anything, Rena had understood what I was feeling inside.
分かったならほら行けよ。
I swung the bat, urging her again to walk. Rena looked back and forth between me and the bat and started walking hesitantly, then stopped again.
早く行けよ早く。
行くからそのバットやめてよ。怖いの。
Rena guarded herself while pointing at me holding the bat. She may have realized that I wasn't planning on using this bat for baseball. I lowered the bat, but still guardedly opened the way for her.
行けよ。これなら文句ないだろ。
There was nothing else she could protest. She passed by me timidly so as not to set me off. As I watched her pass by, she stopped completely after having barely moved at all.
おい 立ち止まるなよ。
Then a powerful gust blew past us, barraging my face with dust. The dust got into my eyes and clouded my vision. While rubbing my eyes with my left hand, I swung blindly with the bat in my right, protecting the small opening I had presented. But Rena didn't even try to attack during that opening. Attack me? No, she hadn't budged an inch. I could tell from the sound of her fluttering skirt in the wind. As her skirt settled, so did the silence. At that moment, the voice inside of me immediately warned me of impending danger. I was caught by surprise. The smell of the air had changed. Without me realizing it, the air around me had suddenly felt like a calamity was about to befall me. It was like the air had suddenly become invisible concrete, like Rena and I were locked in this space. Rena didn't move an inch. Also unable to move, I stared at her back. Rena was the first to break the silence. Instantly, she altered her stance. I felt like I had just witnessed her shift from Rena into the other person who looks like Rena. But the voice was the one I knew well, which filled me with a kind of bewildering pity. Carelessly, I felt relief upon hearing that pitiful voice.
ごめんね。聞いてもいい？
Too shy to even turn around, Rena squeezed her voice out desperately. As she trembled.
なんだよ。
どうしてバットなんか持ってるのかな？
The question Rena asked was by no means unexpected.
俺が何を持ってたっていいだろ。
でも、昨日まで持ってなかったし、どうして突然？
別に突然でもいいだろ。俺がバットを持ってるとおかしいかよ。
だって圭一君、野球とかしない人だったでしょ？おかしいよ。
I couldn't tell what kind of answer she was looking for, and I was getting tired of answering her.
突然野球がしたくなったんだよ。それじゃおかしいか？
おかしいよ。
She answered instantly, and that annoyed me slightly.
突然野球がしたくなった。素振りがしたくなったからバットを持ち歩いてる。それのどこが変なんだよ。
変。おかしい。絶対。なんで圭一君まで。
ぶつくさとうるせえやつだな。俺がスポーツに目覚めるのがそんなに変かよ。
I tried to sound a bit more threatening to end the conversation. Until my suspicions about Rena were cleared, I had no obligation to answer her questions.
ごめんね。そんなに怒らないで。
Rena still didn't turn around and spat out words of apology one after the next.
最後に一個だけ教えて。
これ以上話す気も教える気もねえよ。早く行けよ。
I yelled loudly at her, causing her to flinch like she had been struck. Seeing her in such a pathetic state caused my heart to ache sorely. But even though she was afraid, she stubbornly kept herself from moving. Before I was able to threaten her again, Rena asked her final question.
なんでバットまで同じなの？
What did she mean by the bat was the same? I had no idea what she was talking about.
お前何言ってんだ？
だからなんでバットまで同じなのかなって。
何を言ってんだか全然わかんねえよ。もっとはっきり言え。
Even still, Rena didn't turn around. After inhaling deeply, she screamed.
だからどうしてバットまでサトシ君と同じなの？
サトシってえ？
Upon hearing that name out of the blue, I became dumbfounded for a brief moment. By Satoshi, did she mean the student who transferred out last year? No, that couldn't be. Rena had tried to cover it up by saying he transferred, but Oishi-san told me quite clearly that he was missing. He was the student who sat at my seat up until last year. He was believed to have been demoned away by Oyashiro-sama's curse. I didn't know the details about his disappearance. The aunt he lived with was killed the night of the Watanagashi by a drug addict, and not long after that, he suddenly vanished and was now missing. That Satoshi and I were... What? My gaze fell to the bat in my hands. Could it be? Satoshi Hojo. It was a bit difficult to see, but that was what was written on the white tape at the end of the bat. I see. So this was Satoshi's bat.
ああ、これサトシのバットだったんだな。誰も使ってなかったんでちょっと借りたんだよ。いいだろそれくらい。
そんなことじゃないの。
The way Rena said that made it seem like this bat was something that should never be touched. Like it was some sort of offering at a shrine, or a memento of the deceased. I could only stand there, perplexed and unable to respond. Rena continued speaking without waiting for a reply.
サトシ君の時とどうしてそんなにまで同じなの？
Rena was talking about more than just the bat belonging to Satoshi.
サトシ君もそうだった。野球チームには入ってたけど、本当は野球なんか好きじゃない人だったのに。
それが俺とどう関係が？
サトシ君もある日突然バットを持ち歩き始めたの。チームに入ってただけでスポーツなんかしない人だったのに。
What about it? I closed my mouth before I could say that out loud. Listen carefully, Keiichi. Rena is trying to tell us something important.
サトシ君もね、ある日突然一人で登校するようになったの。ケイイチ君みたいに。そしてね、ある日突然素振りの練習を始めたの。ケイイチ君みたいに。そしてね、ある日突然バットを持ち歩くようになったの。ケイイチ君みたいに。そしてね、ある日突然。
Then one day he suddenly... What? Rena had swallowed her words. Rena's sudden silence brought a hush back to the surrounding area. It was then that I could finally digest the content of the entire conversation. She was saying my chain of actions was exactly the same as Satoshi's. What was the meaning of this? Up until just now, I had forgotten all about Satoshi. I had never paid much thought to him in the first place. Not only that, I didn't even know anything of what he'd done. My actions today should have been my own creation, after all the planning I had done. But they had been the exact same as Satoshi's? Then Satoshi... No, more importantly, if both Satoshi and I acted the same, then there was a really good possibility that what happened after would be the same.
レナ、ある日突然サトシはどうしたんだよ。
Rena knew. She knew what became of Satoshi. No, forget about what happened to a guy in the past. Rena knew what was going to happen to me.
答えろよレナ。サトシはどうしたんだよ。
With that, I grabbed Rena's shoulder violently and forcibly turned her around to face me. As I faced her, I felt a jolt travel through my entire body.
言ったよね、ケイイチ君。
It was that person that I didn't know. At least, it definitely wasn't the Rena Ryugu I'd been talking to up until now. The voice just now didn't have a trace of the trembling or emotion that it had had before. The amount of regret I felt for turning her around so carelessly was unsurpassed. That gaze that pierced like a cold needle, the smile on her face that invoked an image of having been carved out by a knife. Chills went down my spine. My mind froze under a layer of rhyme. Both of Rena's eyes pierced through mine, leaving me unable to look away. As if to remind me of the fear from that time before, Rena brought her face close to mine, so close that I could feel her breathe. I could feel her breath. Sorry. Her face had filled my entire field of vision. Then, her sharply shaped lips grew even sharper, like the curve of a crescent moon. She grinned.
言ったよね、圭一くん。
After a short pause, Rena repeated the same words again.
サトシくんはね、転校しちゃったの。
Transferred, meaning what? What Rena meant must have been some new definition of transfer that I was previously not aware of. My throat and lips dried up. I couldn't even acknowledge what I had just heard. All I could do was swallow down my own saliva. It would seem that Rena saw that as a nod. She pulled her gaze back and spryly stepped back 2-3 paces. As she did, my legs gave out and I fell to my knees pathetically. Rena and me on my knees underneath her emotionless smile. That had to be a very odd sight indeed. Seeing me in that pathetic state, she neither scoffed at me nor held out her hand. But I could neither stand nor escape with her gaze shooting through my eyes. There was undoubtedly a metal bat in my hand. But right now, it was useless to me. It was like a fly caught in her web. I was like a fly caught in her web. Damn it. Heavy sweat beaded all over my body. I could feel it dripping from my skin.
しないよね、圭一くんは。
Rena finally released me from that cage of time after what felt like an eternity. But her question was missing something important and was incredibly vague. Once again I swallowed hard, urging her on.
何をだよ。
What did she not want me to do?
転校。
Satoshi and I had what? All my well-planned actions throughout the day turned out to have been nothing more than a reenactment of what Satoshi had done. Satoshi, had he really been in the same situation as I was now? The friends he had gotten along with had changed suddenly, and for no reason, at least none that I had noticed, planned to kill him? Then, fearing for his life as I am, he got a bat to protect himself and carried it around every day to practice his swing? And then one day, suddenly, he transferred. My blood went cold, causing a prickling sensation to course through my veins. Starting near my heart, it radiated outwards, from the top of my head to the soles of my feet, chilling every part of me without recourse. What did she mean by transfer? What did she mean by transfer? Was Satoshi still at wherever he transferred to? Was he the only one who would be able to understand me? Would he be able to tell me why it all ended up like this? More importantly, where did he transfer to? What did she mean by transfer? What did she mean by transfer? Before I knew it, I was at my front door. The frigid knob was hard to turn. Was nobody home? It wasn't that odd of an occurrence. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the single key attached to my first seal keychain. I stepped into the entryway. Just as I was about to take off my shoes, a chill ran down my spine. Someone had entered right behind me. Like a classmate messing around, standing right up against my back. You're kidding, right? It had to be my imagination. Logically speaking, it was impossible for someone to be able to hide their presence within my personal space all the way through the door. But there was undoubtedly someone behind me. Hey now, Keiichi. How do you know they're there even though they're behind you? Because I could hear the sound of flowing hair. There's no other reason I'd hear that sound. That was the presence. Because I could hear the sound of them blinking. Keiichi Maebara, there's no way you could hear that. My most base instincts were warning me of the presence. Common sense was telling me that it was just my imagination. It was just my imagination. There was no one behind me. I began to erase the mental image of an eerie figure standing behind me. But at the same time, I asked myself, if there was nobody, then what was I feeling? As an uncomfortable sensation crawled up my spine. Actually, wouldn't it be better if there was somebody there? If there was nobody there when you turned around, would you be able to accept that? I'd be able to answer all those questions just by looking behind me. But I didn't have enough courage to even do that simple task. Oh, right. I could try speaking to them. The person behind me might answer me. It was a random thought. I didn't care how I went about it, just so long as I didn't have to turn around. If I'd calmed down and thought about it, I would have known that wouldn't have solved anything.
どなたですか?
I spoke in such a hoarse, broken voice that I couldn't believe it was my own. I could almost feel them contemplating their response. I felt it. There's no way I should be able to do that. Calm down, Keiichi. It's all in your head. That time, I was certain I heard it. As if hesitantly trying to answer my inquiry, I was certain I could hear the sound of somebody inhaling. I heard it. I heard it clearly. It was a girl. A young girl. I didn't know who, but a tiny speck of courage in me, however reckless it was, inspired a primal yet fitting solution to this current predicament. A scream. All the force in my body released from my lungs and through my throat, ceasing all thought processes in my head. Suppressing all my thoughts and emotions, I began to collapse like a house of cards, somehow managing to twist my body and look back as I did so. It was definitely there. Right there. Somebody was there. Until the moment I turned around. Until I brought the area behind me into my field of vision. They were definitely there. Falling face up, my eyes traced the remnants of the presence suspended in the empty space. It couldn't be. They were invisible. They looked like they weren't there. But they were actually still standing there? As I screamed, all the emotions I was holding back burst free in a violent wave. However, I was decidedly calm as my emotional dam collapsed. The turbulent wave of pent-up emotions was skillfully diverted into a torrent of aggression. That emotion was definitely required to extricate myself from the bizarre situation happening right in front of me. In my state of heightened lucidity, I entrusted my body to the fury. The metal bat held firm in my right hand as if drawn there by a magnet. A mid-level sweep would be the hardest tack to dodge. Did I say tack to a dodge? I think I did. I'm so sorry. Anyway, I remembered reading something like that from a book about swordsmanship or something. I brandished my will to fight. The afterimage of that amalgamation of metal flashed as it swung from left to right, beating against the entryway. The bat slammed into the right wall, the tip rebounding violently. Very calmly, I transferred the force of the rebound into a sweep to the left. The door of the shoe cupboard was split into pieces. Those two swings whipped through empty space, but they seemed to have a great psychological impact on the enemy. I could feel the panic emanating from that space. The attack wasn't the only thing required. I extracted the bat from the cupboard it was embedded in and screamed as I spun my entire body around in a large arc. My screams shook the air, imbuing my ferocious swing with even more destructive power. Crack! Without mercy or restraint, my violent strike, with certainly fatal force behind it, shattered the top of the cupboard. None of my attacks struck the enemy, but my ferocity had certainly seemed to impact them. Breathing heavily, my entire body soaked in sweat, the invisible enemy, there but not there, dispersed. When I was certain that the enemy had retreated, I locked the front door and latched the chain. No way. Had it only feigned retreat and was now inside my house? Once again, I channeled my aggression and searched the house for the presence. But it was gone. I had succeeded in fending it off. At that moment, the tension drained from my body and I let out a deep sigh of relief. All the emotions I'd been holding back chaotically merged together and began to flood out. A hodgepodge of fear, accomplishment, and disbelief all mixed together and began to flow through my body. Unable to deal with each individual feeling, I beat them all back with the strongest, exhaustion. Even in this moment, I remained composed. After checking that all the doors throughout the house were locked, I went up to my room on the second floor and closed the curtains. I straightened my back and tilted my head back a little. After clearing my mind of all my idle thoughts, I managed to calm down even more. What was that at the front door? There was definitely something there. Thinking about it, maybe it was just an apparition I dreamt up in my confused state, but I really didn't think that was the case. Calm down, Keiichi Maebara. Compose yourself. But no matter how calmly I thought about it, what just happened wasn't a figment of my imagination. It was obviously a supernatural phenomenon, and without a doubt, something was behind me. It wasn't some sort of illusion I saw amidst my confusion and disorientation. Proof? I had just one piece. When I asked, "Who is it?" they inhaled as if they were about to answer. That sound had clearly reached my ears. The situation I was in right now was still unclear. Either I'd been possessed by the supernatural phenomenon known as Yashiro-sama's curse, or this was a ruse by the villagers who believed in it and were imitating it. Either way, their motives were unclear. The roundabout way it had been done was also a mystery. If it was perpetrated by humans, that would mean admitting that it was Rena and the rest of them doing it. But it would be solvable. Oishi-san and the rest of the police would surely arrest my enemy. But if it was a manifestation of Oyashiro-sama's curse, I wondered what would happen. Oyashiro-sama... my bad. Oishi-san very, very clearly declared that curses didn't exist. At that time, those words were pretty dependable. But as things were now, with the rising possibility that the perpetrators were not human, he suddenly seemed quite unreliable. If I told Oishi-san this was the work of Oyashiro-sama's curse, what would happen? I couldn't imagine his reaction, but it would go without question that a void would expand rapidly between myself and Oishi-san. Without me having so few allies to begin with, with me having so few allies to begin with and not being able to confidently declare whether or not this was a curse, there was no merit to doing that. I'd better keep the facts of what just happened at the doorway to myself. It would be better if I didn't add what happened here to the memo behind the clock. There was still the ever so slight possibility that I was actually confused when I thought I was composed, and I was just going berserk in the entryway. How wonderful would that be if that was what really happened? I would be able to refute Oyashiro-sama's curse. But if I denied Oyashiro-sama's curse, then that would mean admitting that Rena and the rest were the perpetrators. If I said that Rena and the rest weren't the perpetrators, then that would mean believing in Oyashiro-sama's curse. By denying both of those, I would be admitting that I myself was losing it. The three options from which I couldn't choose became a trilemma of sorts. They mixed together and formed a whirlpool in my mind, making my head spin. Once again, I straightened myself and leaned my head back slightly to cool myself down. Calm down, Keiichi. Accept what has actually happened as reality. Stop thinking of anything more than that. But I couldn't help but think of it. How wonderful it would be if it turned out I was delirious and everything up until now was a figment of my imagination. Oyashiro-sama's curse wouldn't exist, and I would still be bestest buddies with Rena and the rest. I would have to be crazy. That was the first time in my life I'd ever wished for such a thing. Oh, boy. Sorry. The phone rang noisily downstairs. Generally, there were no calls for me, so I never really answered the phone much. But since my parents weren't here, I had no choice. I squirmed off the bed and went downstairs.
もしもし、前原です。
ケイチ、お母さんだけど。
I intuitively had a bad feeling about this. It was because I thought she was going to ask me to go out and buy some things. So I took the initiative.
何？別に俺、夕食はインスタントでもいいよ。まだいっぱいあったでしょ。
The other day, we went out as a family and bought a whole case of cup noodles. I wanted to get a bunch of different kinds, actually, but they refused since individual packs were expensive, so instead I got a whole case of the mega-sized pork bone and ginger flavored ones I liked. But my parents didn't like strong flavors and didn't touch any of them, so the cupboards were still full of them.
だからさ、買い物に行く必要はないんじゃないの？
ケイチ、買い物のお願いじゃないの。お父さんとお母さんね、お仕事の関係で急遽東京に行かなくちゃならなくなったの。
え？今から？
This was really abrupt.
もう着いちゃってるの。お昼には出発してたからね。
It's quite a distance to Tokyo from Hinamizawa. Gunning at full speed down the highway would still take 6 hours. Dad has a license, but since he doesn't like the highway, they likely took the train. It would have taken longer.
ケイチもお父さんとお母さんの話を聞いてたからわかるかもしれないけど、お父さんのお仕事の契約がね、今ちょっとうまくいってないの。
Now that she mentioned it, I did remember that they talked all the time about how his job prospects weren't looking so good.
お父さんはそういうのに繊細な人だから、このままだとお仕事にも影響が出ちゃうの。
Part of my father's particular fragile artistic personality, his emotions changed as easily as the fall sky. You could also just say he couldn't take criticism.
でも、そんなの電話でやり取りすればいいじゃないか。
ケイチ、お父さんのお仕事なんだから、もうちょっと応援してあげて。ね、とにかく電話よりも直接会って話した方が早いの。誤解もないし。
As their son, there was nothing more I could say once they started talking about work.
だから帰るのは明日の晩になっちゃうの。ケイチ、一人で大丈夫よね。
別に死にはしないよ。
ケイチ、死んじゃうなんて軽々しく言っちゃダメよ。心配事があったら相談してね。母さん、きっと相談に乗れると思うから。
Yesterday I did bring up if I died rather abruptly, so I suppose they were a little bit worried. But really, I was more depressed by the fact that nothing would be solved by telling them. But I didn't plan on dying. At least not while I still knew nothing. I would never allow it.
死なないよ。俺はあがいてでも生き延びる。
そう。じゃあね、明日の朝ちゃんと起きるのよ。朝ごはんは食べてね。
お風呂と歯磨きも忘れないのよ。
へいへい。そんじゃ。
The call ended like that. Sometimes my parents went off to Tokyo for business meetings, but Tokyo was far away. They normally did things by phone. The times they did go were normally planned out in advance. It never happened this suddenly. I couldn't say that those circumstances didn't feel strange, or rather, unnatural. Anyway, I only needed to recognize the reality of the situation. That tonight, I was the only one in the house. That when my parents came back from work, I'd be gone, missing, vanished. Looking back on the series of events of the previous 5 years involving Oyashiro-sama's curse, it wouldn't seem that strange at all. Come to think of it, it was getting pretty late. I didn't think it was good that the only light on in the whole house was from my room on the second floor. It was the same as broadcasting to the enemy that my parents were gone, and this was their chance. First, I ran to the living room, flicked on the lights, and turned the TV on to a reassuring volume. Next was the study. I similarly turned on the lights and some music. With this, from the outside, it would look like my parents were here. Once again, I went through the house, checking to see if there was anything left unlocked. When I saw the veranda and the laundry still hanging out there, I went pale. That would have made it too obvious. It needed to be taken down. You know what I mean. I snatched down the laundry haphazardly and erased all traces that my mother wasn't there. It should be fine now. Ah! The garage! They hadn't gone all the way to Tokyo by car, but they had gone up to Okinomiya Station. The garage was empty, wide open, and in plain sight. This was not good. I panicked and rushed out to the back to close the normally open garage door. It should be fine now. Ah! I needed to get the paper! Mom always got the paper. Since they left in the afternoon, the evening paper was still out there. My premonition was correct. I pulled out everything from the mailbox and dropped it in the entryway. With this, for sure this time, it should be fine. Come to think of it, leaving the cupboard busted like that for my little freakout was kinda bad. I'll just say I tripped and fell, and that the bat I was holding smashed into it. Even so, just leaving it in its current state wasn't good. I should clean it up a little before Mom got back and scolded me. I remembered that there was a broom and a dustpan in the closet. As I was going to get them, the phone rang once again.
もしもし、前原です。
あら、圭一くん、お母様はいらっしゃいますかしら。
今ちょっといないんですけど。
You idiot, Keiichi Maebara! Don't reveal that your parents are gone! You can follow up still. Calm down and take care of it.
すぐに戻ると思います。
That wasn't a good response either. Now they might say they'll call again, or to tell her to call them when she comes back.
なら結構です。大した話でもありませんから。では失礼しますわね。
The scenario I feared didn't play out, eliciting a sigh of relief. That call was fortunate in more ways than one. I'd have to deal with any telephone calls coming in from my parents tonight. I was somehow able to deal with the phone call just now, but I couldn't continue to rely on such poor improvisation. I needed to make up a good story to explain that my parents were home but couldn't answer the phone at the moment. They were making tempura and couldn't step away right now. That wasn't good enough. They were sick and went to bed because they weren't feeling well. Was that going to be safe enough? I was thinking about it on the way back to my room when the phone rang once again. It was like they were calling because they knew I was going to lie. I didn't want to pick up, but I knew I had to. They'd suspect my parents weren't here. I should have just taken the phone off the hook under the pretense that I didn't realize that it was... Wait, how do I read... I should have just taken the phone off the hook under the pretense that I didn't realize that it was... whatever. But since the phone rang, I had to pick it up. Oh, duh. Sorry. I realize he's saying just take the phone off the hook and pretend he didn't realize that it was off the hook so that it wouldn't ring. Anyway, my brain farting aside, I prepared myself and lifted up the receiver.
もしもし。
I stopped announcing this was the Mayabara residence. I had no reason to be kind to someone I didn't know the identity of. But unlike my uncouth voice, the person on the other side sounded goofy and lighthearted.
どうも、夜分遅くに申し訳ありません。私、沖宮書房の大石と申しますが。
大石さんですか。
前原さんですか。こんばんは。お元気そうで何よりです。
ちょっと待ってくださいね。
I grabbed the portable handset and rushed up to my room with it. It was the same no matter where I was, since there was no one else home. But I wanted to be in a spot that I just felt a bit safer when speaking on the phone with Oishi-san.
お待たせしました。
いかがですか、その後お変わりは。
Since then, when was that exactly? There was something about the brazen way he talked that rubbed me the wrong way. The last time I spoke with Oishi-san was 2 days ago. The day I stayed home from school, I met Oishi-san on the way back from the hospital, and we headed into town for lunch and had a talk. Then after that, Rena and Mion came to check up on me. Whenever I spoke with Oishi-san, they always knew about it. It was like that since the first time I met him. Today's phone call may well be found out by them as well.
もしもし、聞こえてますか、前原さん。
すみません。なんて言いました？
その後、何か変わったことはありませんかとお尋ねしたんです。お返事がないんで焦りましたよ。
特には。
The words stopped in my throat. There was a ton of stuff that had happened. All of it baffling. What should I talk about? I didn't understand any of it, but I should try asking. If I didn't ask now, I may never have another chance. This night when my parents weren't home, I had no guarantees I would make it through the night safely after all.
大石さん、やっぱり俺、命を狙われているみたいです。
本当ですか？
偶然の可能性もあるんですが、先日俺が病気で休んだ日、夕方にあの二人がお見舞いに来たんです。
あの二人？
レナとミオンです。そしてそこで大石さんと一緒に昼飯を食ったことを正されました。
それで
お見舞いってことでおはぎを置いていったんですが、その中に針が入ってたんです。偶然飲み込まずに済みましたが、これってやっぱり脅迫でしょうか？
その針は？
よく見かけるような普通の裁縫針のようでした。糸を通す穴が開いていて。
違いますよ、前原さん。針です。証拠になります。脅迫だと立証できるかもしれません。その針はありますか？
That's right. That's it! I dropped the receiver and rushed downstairs. When I tossed the mochi, I had overlooked it out of terror, but that needle was a valuable piece of evidence. Let's see. I threw the mochi and the needle at the wall together. If it was there, then it would be on the living room wall. But my prudent mother had cleaned that living room wall, and there was not a trace of mochi left on it. Excuse me. Could it be that it dropped in the gap between the wall and the carpet? I frantically searched by running my palm along the carpet, but nothing turned up. I tried moving around the sofa and desks, pulling up the carpet, then flapping it around. But I couldn't find the needle. Did my mom clean up everything without noticing it? It was just 2 days ago. I didn't know what day they collected the burnable trash, but it may still be in the trash bin in the kitchen. I rushed into the kitchen, opened up the lid of the pail, and poured out the contents. But even at a glance, I could tell that it would be incredibly difficult to find the needle in this pile of trash. I was looking for a needle in a trash stack. I know. Wait, I know. I'll try running my hand through it. It was a bit gross, but I was looking for a needle. If I felt a small prick, I'd be able to find it. It was a pretty tactless method, but it was the quickest. I held my breath and started striking the pile of trash with my hand. Filth flew about. There was nothing more disgusting than this, but it was not the time to be concerned about such details. I continued on for a while, but nothing turned up. I wanted to search more thoroughly, but I was still on the phone. I shouldn't keep Oishi-san waiting for too long. Later, when Mom got back, I'd have to ask her if there was a needle. I hastily began scribbling on the notepad affixed to the refrigerator with a magnet. Was there a needle? I scrawled the words with a red pen. I then dashed back up the stairs, where I had been keeping Oishi-san waiting for far too long.
もしもし、どうでしたか？
見つかりません。あの時はつい気が動転していて。
そうですか。見つかればでいいんです。保管しておいてくださいね。
That's right. The needle wasn't the only incident. I had to tell him about this morning with the hit and run.
あと大石さん、それだけじゃないんです。実は今朝。
That van was definitely aiming for me. I could say that without question due to the circumstances at that time.
その車のナンバープレートは見ましたか？こちらでも探してみます。
Damn! At the time, I just flipped out yelling at him, but I didn't look at the plate. What failures on my part with the needle and the plate number? I was so focused on just protecting myself that I let some of the most important details slip out of my grasp. I punched my pillow, annoyed at how worthless I was.
すみません。白いワゴン車ってこと以外はわかりません。
仕方ないことですよ、前原さん。惹かれかければ気も動転します。
やっぱりこれらって偶然じゃないですよね。
Oishi-san started to hem and haw over on the other end. I could imagine him folding his arms.
あと、レナの様子もやっぱり怪しいです。
それはどんな感じですか？
What Rena said on the way home today, asking why I was so much like Satoshi-kun. Now I could say it with confidence. That Rena knew what happened to Satoshi. She knew that there was more to it than him just simply disappearing.
レナは知っています。去年の鬼隠しにあったサトシのことを何か知っています。
それは具体的にどういうことですか？
レナが言うには、俺はサトシとそっくりらしいんです。このまま行くと、俺もサトシと同じ運命をたどると、そんな感じのことを言うんです。
運命ですか？具体的にどんな運命をたどるか言及しましたか？
天候と。
天候？
レナは、サトシは転校したって言ってるんです。で、俺もこのままだと転校しちゃうぞって。
Oishi-san let out a stern sigh and then grumbled loudly.
前原さん、それはおそらく何かの脅迫、もしくは警告ですね。
俺もそう思ってます。
At that point, I started to think. Would it be prudent to sum up everything that had happened up until now as the machinations of some human perpetrator? Other than the theory of it being Rena and the others, I was left with Oyashiro-sama's curse actually existing as the only explanation. Of course, I couldn't tell that to Oishi-san. Except, Rena's strange behavior could be proof of either scenarios. Whether it was Oyashiro-sama's curse being real, or everything being part of a conspiracy committed by all the villagers. Rena was involved. Rena had to know something. Rena was suspicious. What exactly was Rena? I couldn't help but think she was somehow involved with the prior string of mysterious deaths. I seem to recall that Oishi-san had admitted that he had dug into Rena's past a little. He was probably just downplaying it when he said a little, meaning he had actually dug pretty deep, most likely. I wanted to hear about Rena. I wanted to know what happened at her previous school, among other things that were still unknown to me. If Rena was somebody I should suspect. No, not that. I wanted to know the truth. Tonight, I was alone in this huge house. Even though I said I couldn't count on them, I had lost the security I felt I had just by my parents being around. It wasn't like this house was some sort of fortress or castle. If a malicious person decided to use brute force, they'd easily gain entry. There were no other residences close to the Maebara residence. No one would be able to hear anything, no matter how loud it was. I had never felt as much resentment towards my father's artistic temperament and the fact that he had this house built in such a remote location as I did right now. I wondered if I would still be here by tomorrow morning. So I had to ask, right now, because I had no idea when the next chance would come.
大石さん、聞きたいことがあるんです。隠さないでくださいね。
ええ、何でも聞いてください。
Even though he was so far away on the other end of the line, this was the most reliable he had ever felt. I wanted to ask about Rena, about what happened at her previous school.
実はレナの
I noticed a sound that had been going on for a while now. Since I was so focused on the call, I hadn't paid attention to it at first, but I finally realized it was the doorbell. The time was 7 o'clock. It was past the time the postman would be making a delivery, and past any sensible time for a neighbor to be visiting. I considered just acting like nobody was home, but that wouldn't be good. That would ruin all the work I put in making it look like my parents were home. I need to answer the door.
もしもし、前原さん？
すみません。誰か来たみたいですので、ちょっと玄関に行ってきます。
お客さんですか。すみません、すみません。今夜のお電話はこれくらいにしましょうか。
That would be a problem.
いえ、すぐ戻りますから。電話はこのままでいいですか？
はいはい、構いませんよ。
I dropped the handset on my bed and dashed down to the door. I needed to make up a good excuse to get them to leave. I had a hunch it was the lady who called right before Oishi-san did. In which case, it would be one of the neighbors who's friends with my mom. I'll just say Mom isn't feeling well and went to bed early. That would be the easiest option. It'd be hard for her to ask me to wake my mom up if she's not feeling well. The bell continued to ring at regular intervals. If someone didn't answer after you rang the bell so much, you'd normally give up and go home, wouldn't you? Without removing the chain, I opened the door slightly and peered out at the visitor. A chill ran down my spine. I knew it. Somewhere deep inside, I had prepared for this moment. I had tried to escape by imagining it was the easiest person to deal with, one of my mom's friends.
こんばんは。
レナ。
There shouldn't be any reason for Rena to come over at this hour. The timing also made me feel uneasy. Because it was just as I was about to ask Oishi-san about Rena. I wish I could have chalked this up to a mere coincidence. But those unsettling words from Mion several days ago echoed back at me.
さーてね、おじさんにわからないことはないからね。
レナ一人。
It seems that Mion wasn't with her. But that didn't change the situation at all.
何しに来たんだよ。
ねえ、ケイチ君、ちゃんとドアを開けてお話ししたいな。レナは玄関に入っちゃダメなのかな
It was true that speaking through a chained door wasn't the right way to talk to a classmate. but
うち夜は必ずチェーンかけてるんだよ。気にすんなよ。
なら仕方ないかな。
Brenna looked at the ground sadly. But she kept smiling at least, and her effort to keep that smile up was quite pitiful. Even though she was tugging at my heartstrings, I didn't lower my guard. As long as I stayed like this, even if it made my heart ache, my life wasn't in danger. What I really feared, more than the possibility that hoodlums would assault me if I removed the chain, was trusting Rena enough to remove the chain and having my friendship betrayed. As long as the chain wasn't unlatched, even if it made my heart ache, I wouldn't have to deal with being betrayed by Rena. Since it didn't seem like I'd removed the chain from her silent urging, she appeared to give up on trying to get into the entranceway.
あのさ、圭一くん、ご飯食べた？
No, I haven't eaten. Since my mom wasn't there, dinner wouldn't be ready no matter how long I waited. I laid down when I got home, was woken up by the phone, and didn't have a chance to eat since I used up all that time talking. I was going to have cup noodles in any case. I could just eat one whenever I wanted to.
いや、まだだよ。それがどうしたよ。
じゃあよかった。これ見て。お惣菜とか持ってきてあげたの。
Rena held out a stack of boxes wrapped in cloth.
お台所とか貸してくれれば、お味噌汁も温めてあげられるよ。
いいよ、そこまでしてくれなくても。
でも、お豆腐もお野菜もたっぷりなの。圭一くん、そういうの嫌いかな。
There's no way I wouldn't like that. I love miso soup with lots of ingredients. White radish, carrots, burdock root, and potatoes. Dense and fibrous root vegetables. Yeah, that miso soup looks incredible.
ご飯も持ってきてあげたから、レンジで温めればすぐ食べられるし。
Without a doubt, rice needs miso soup. Stuffing rice down your gullet, sipping miso soup in between ravenous bites. Oh yes, how wonderful it is to be born Japanese.
それからね、またお漬物を作ってきたんだよ。今度は山菜のお漬物なの。
Before I had moved here to Hinamizawa, I scoffed at the mountain vegetables called sansai. But I was captivated by their charm the first time I tried them. Such a deep yet light flavor. Those so-called supermarket vegetables taste rough and overpowering in comparison. If you had to describe them, then they were the vegetables for the uninitiated. To become an expert such as myself, you had to partake of sansai. You first had to partake of sansai. It was common knowledge around here that the Ryugu family's traditional pickles were wonderfully delicious. No matter what kind of pickles they were. They'd go so well with that fluffy white rice.
それからね。
But wait, there's more! So delicious. It just seems so delicious. Farewell to my unhealthy self who said he'd make do with cup ramen. Rena appeared to be in good spirits and she was offering such a delicious sounding dinner. The stress evaporated from my gut and hunger reared its voracious head. At the same time, my wariness of Rena suddenly dwindled. Rena did say she was alone. It shouldn't be a problem letting her inside. Though the possibility that it was laced with poison still hadn't been ruled out. At that moment, a cold chill ran down my spine once again. I couldn't understand why such a sensation had occurred just then. But the voice inside me was sounding the alarm. This happy Rena speaking of this charming dinner was dependent on one premise. And that premise was that tonight, dinner hadn't been made at my house. Meaning it was under the assumption that my mom, who should be making it, wasn't here. At any normal household, 7 o'clock would be around the middle of dinner time. If my mom were here, we'd be eating dinner around this time as well. The fact that she brought over all the makings of a meal at this time was inherently strange. Unless she knew. Rena, did she know that my parents weren't home? But there was also the chance that this was a bluff. I had turned on the lights and a bunch of other stuff to make it seem like my parents were there. There was a chance that Rena was unsure if my parents were home. But I had to wonder. The laundry, the garage, the evening paper. There were plenty of signs of them being hastily tidied. There were plenty of signs of them being hastily tidied up. It was hard to say that Rena didn't have a chance to determine if my parents were here or not. But there was no reason for me to confess that right now. I should try holding on to that fact as long as I could. First of all, the chain was still latched. As long as I didn't take it off, Rena wouldn't be able to do anything to me.
Ah, ありがたいんだけどさ、もう少しで夕飯ができるみたいなんだよ。
そうなの？そうなの？
せっかくで申し訳ないんだけどさ、その
Unable to think of a good way to refuse, my words trailed off weakly.
でもちょっとはおかずになると思うな。
悪いけど間に合ってるよ。うちのおふくろってさ、結構おかずをいっぱい作るんだよ。だから
おかずあるの？
With a smile that bordered on a cringe, I dodged her questions apologetically. But the feeling I tried to ignore began creeping up my back again. I spoke as if my mom were setting dinner down right now, but it didn't mesh well with what Rena was saying. Rena was talking as if she was aware of some obvious fact, and that I was aware of it as well.
ケイチ君もおかずとか作れるんだね。何を作ったのかな？
いや、その別に俺が
Rena had assumed out of nowhere that I had made the dishes. No, not so much that I'd made them, but rather that my mom hadn't.
本当に作ったの？おかず。ケイチ君が？
だから俺が作ったんじゃないよ。おふくろが作った。あ、いや、作ってるんだよ今。だからさ、悪いけどレナの持ってきてくれたのは食べられないんだよ。
Rena fell silent at that moment. At that moment, I felt that the light had suddenly disappeared from her eyes.
ケイチ君のお夕飯。
なんだっていいじゃないか。
ね。
The conversation might appear natural at first glance, but Rena was firmly in control. It felt like I was being interrogated.
そのお夕飯、お湯だけで作れるんじゃないかな。
おいおい、侮るなよ。うちのおふくろのスペシャルなディナーを見くびるなってんだ。そりゃもう満願全席状態ですごいのなんの。
I tried my best to put on a strong front, but I couldn't grip my teeth quite right. So instead, I looked like someone who was borderline hysterical. But Rena showed no reaction whatsoever, even to that silliness.
ケイチ君、本当にお母さん、ご飯作ってってくれたの？
いや、だからくれたんじゃなくて今作ってるんだよ。もうすぐ晩飯に。
Rena had taken that assertion of mine, that my mother was home and making dinner right now, and was completely ignoring it. I could tell that the more I panicked, the colder Rena became.
ねえ、ケイチ君。
At that moment, an uncomfortable chill crept in from the gap in the doorway.
お母さん、お家にいるのかな？
I couldn't keep up the charade anymore. Rena. She knew full well that my parents weren't home. I'd come too far to admit that now. Anyway, my parents were here and we'd be having dinner soon. That was the situation I had concocted. So I answered. I told her she was here.
いるよ。もちろん。
I could feel the humidity drying out from the surrounding air. Rena's eyes were becoming even more frigid, piercing me with their gelid? With their gelid glare. I'll have to look that up.
どうして？
え、何のことかな？
I tried acting casual, but that facade was torn off me the instant I looked into Rena's eyes. That look, it informed me of Rena's response faster than she could open her mouth.
どうしてさっきから嘘をつくのかな？かな？
嘘なんか。
嘘だよね。
Or gelid, my bad.
嘘なんかじゃ。
嘘だよ。
Rena's outburst sent a jolt surging through my body. Rena and I were still separated by what few inches that slightly ajar but still chained door could afford. I can't speak right now. But despite that, I was still being cornered. My house, which I'd considered a safe haven until now, had become more like a dark alleyway where no one could save me.
圭一君のお夕飯当てるよ。ね。
I knew now that Rena had already known that my parents would not be here tonight. But it was still so strange that it had come to this. Even if she somehow knew that my parents weren't home, there was no way she should be able to guess what I'd be eating tonight. But Rena said she'd guess. How could she guess it? How could she know it was
カッ
instant?
プラーメン当たりでしょ？
That I was going to eat. Wait. The cooking repertoire of a man who can't do housework is probably nothing but cup ramen after all. Looking at this statistically, it was the most probable answer. That didn't mean she was guessing.
ラーメンだけじゃきっとお腹すくと思うな。ご飯とかも一緒の方がきっと腹持ちいいと思うよ。
Calm down, Keiichi Maebara. This was just coincidence. Rena was just reading certain tells of mine. So the fact that she was inferring what I was thinking alarmed me. But it wasn't as if she was actually reading my mind. If it was being read, then she was a demon. No, not a demon. Things like that. They couldn't possibly exist.
好きなの？
ラーメンがかよ。
豚骨生姜味。
Rena indicated that the point my answer was addressing was wrong. Her rebuttal was so short that I momentarily didn't understand the words Rena had spoken.
ごめん、レナ。今、なんて？
何が？
今さ、何が好きって聞いたんだよ。
It wasn't long before I regretted how carelessly I'd pushed forward with that question. It was such a simple answer. That was why I wasn't able to comprehend it.
豚骨生姜味。
I wondered how I appeared in the moments my mind went completely blank until the moment I was able to recover. As my field of view began to distort, slowly swirling in a counterclockwise direction, I lost all sense of balance.
なんでそこまでわかるんだよ。
I didn't even deny it. That was the type of frenzied state I was in. How could Rena... Oh, shit, sorry. How could Rena know even this? Not even caring as I mashed my head against the door, I fixated my gaze on Rena. But she didn't even flinch when she saw me do that.
確かに勝った。まとめて勝った。俺が箱買いした。 それがどうしてわかるんだ。
なんでかな、不思議だね。だね。
How could you dodge that question at a time like this? The chain and the door suddenly were no longer protecting me.
どうしてわかる。なぜ知ってる。答えろ。
買ったのはセブンスマートだよね。
A shiver ran up my spine. I tried covering it up with an angry facade.
だからなんでわかるんだよ。
圭一くんの後ろずっとくっついてたから。
何を言ってんだよ。
I couldn't understand what she was saying. I couldn't understand why she was saying she'd been following me all this time.
だからレナが圭一くんの後ろにずっとくっついてたの。
Like that night? That night I was absorbed in my phone conversation with Oishi-san. I didn't even sense her being there, standing behind the door, behind me, standing there. Just like that?
圭一くんがいろんなラーメン選んでるとこ後ろからずっと見てたの。いろんな種類を選んでたんだよね。それでお母さんに怒られたの。高いラーメンばっかり選ぶから一種類にしなさいって。それで圭一くん大好きな大きいカップの豚骨生姜味を選んだんだよね。レナも好きだよ、豚骨ラーメン。でも大きいカップは全部食べきれないけどね。
My brain was paralyzed, dulling my senses. It might have been a defense mechanism to diminish the fear I was feeling to non-traumatizing levels. With the fear being diminished, the fog enveloping my mind was cleared away. Then, I could understand what Rena was saying and started to put meaning behind her words. Even so, my fear hadn't subsided completely. It was like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, eyes closed so I didn't have to look down. It didn't actually solve any of the basic problems. I slowly took a step backwards, and as I withdrew, Rena advanced.
だから圭一くん、ここを開けて。レナと一緒にご飯食べよう。きっと美味しいから。ね。
Rena's pale, slender fingers squirmed through the crack in the door, one at a time, as if they had a mind of their own, rattling the chain. If she had unlatched the chain from the door, a feeling of terror would have just exploded within me. But Rena didn't do that. She was simply imploring me to remove the chain. I tried my hardest to light the fuse to the powder keg in my heart. Trying again and again. Clatter, clatter. But it doesn't light. It doesn't light!
開けて、圭一くん。
帰ってくれ。頼むから帰ってくれ。
どうしてそんな意地悪を言うのかな。かな。
帰ってくれ。帰れよ。帰れ。
The powder keg inside me finally went off. No smoldering. It just exploded. I tackled the door. The force through the door had knocked Rena momentarily off balance. I couldn't hesitate here. I grabbed onto the doorknob with both hands, planted my feet firmly, and pulled with all my might. But that slamming sound I so desired didn't happen. I could feel a tiny, disturbing bit of resistance keeping the door from closing. And the source of that was Rena's fingers. Each of those fingers wriggling, squirming around like the tendrils of a carnivorous plant through the crack in the doorway.
痛いよ、圭一くん。痛い。
It wasn't a harsh shriek, but more of a yelp she was trying to keep back.
帰れ。帰れ。帰れ。
I kept on pulling the door with all my might. I didn't even realize that if I didn't loosen my pull on the door at least momentarily, Rena wouldn't be able to pull her fingers out, and that was why the door wasn't closing.
本当に痛いの圭一くん。悪ふざけが過ぎたなら謝るよ。
I didn't care one bit for her apology. No matter how much she apologized, it didn't change any of what she had done up until now. It didn't change anything!
痛いの痛いの。ごめんなさいごめんなさいごめんなさい。
帰れ帰れ帰れ
Rena couldn't leave even if she wanted to because I trapped her fingers. Rena's white fingers had become deep red and were no longer even squirming.
ごめんなさいごめんなさいごめんなさい
帰れ帰れ帰れ
ごめんなさいごめんなさいごめんなさいごめんなさいごめんなさい。
Rena's apologies were occasionally twisted with pain, but like a broken record, she was intent on repeating it over and over. Go away, go away, go away! Stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it! I pulled on the door even harder. Finally, Rena's fingers were somehow able to slip out from their imprisonment in the doorway. The moment that happened, the door closed soundly, and I could hear the thud of Rena falling on her butt on the other side. I locked the door immediately. It made a loud clunk, voicing my rejection to Rena.
ごめんなさいごめんなさいごめんなさいごめんなさい。圭一くんごめんなさい。ここを開けて圭一くん。
Rena leaned against the door, apologizing profusely and nothing else. After confirming that I was sufficiently sealed off from her, I trudged away from the entryway. On the other side, I could still hear Rena echoing her apology. Gomen nasai, gomen nasai. Those painful words, they would be forever seeking my forgiveness. I didn't feel bad about this at all. But that wasn't out of any sort of malice. I felt a sort of hazy sense of relief that I was able to escape from Rena. Before, Mion had threatened me at this doorway, saying there was nothing she didn't know. And just now, at the same place, Rena told me the same thing. My feeble attempts to disguise the fact my parents weren't home had served no purpose from the start. I should have just pretended to be out, and not even opened the door. My meager plans hadn't helped at all. In Hinamizawa, it was impossible to outwit them. Even though I was on the other side of the door, I wanted to get as far away from Rena as possible. 1 step, 2 steps. With each one, her sniffling apologies became more distant. I sprinted up the stairs and dove into my room. As you would expect, I was finally no longer able to hear Rena repeating her endless apology. Diving into my bed, I was startled by the hard lump I felt. There was something in my bed? It was the receiver. I finally remembered. I was in the middle of a call with Oishi-san. Looking at the clock, apparently not much time had passed since I went downstairs. Could it be that my clock had run out of batteries? I had talked with Rena for so long. How did almost no time pass? But the hand on the clock was ticking forward 1 second every second as usual. As I put the still warm receiver to my ear, time, which felt frozen, began moving once again.
もしもし、大石さん、お待たせしてすみませんでした。
いえいえ、大してお待ちしていませんよ。
It became apparent that the amount of time that had passed between myself and Oishi-san was different. Over the phone, I could hear an energetic voice from a sports program or something. It drove home just how far away Oishi-san really was.
今、レナが来ました。
遊びに来たんですか?
I wasn't confident that I could coherently explain the situation to Oishi-san. But I didn't need to right now. Right now, I needed to know about Rena. That's right, I was planning to ask Oishi-san more about Rena, but Rena's little visit had interrupted the conversation. What was true and what was false? I couldn't tell. The one thing I knew was the single grim reality that Rena was suspicious. I might be able to figure something out if I asked Oishi-san about her. Up until now, I I had regretted it whenever I forced myself to ask about things that I was better off not knowing. But looking at it that way, you could say I'd hit rock bottom. There was no possible way I could feel any more regret than I did right now. No, rather, I wanted to know if there was anything beyond this I would regret more. Forget about tomorrow. It wasn't out of the realm of possibility for something to happen tonight. I wanted to know everything I could. I was absolutely not going to die like this. Not without knowing anything. I definitely won't.
竜宮レナさんのことですか？調べましたよ。まあ簡単には。
I understood that Oishi-san was talking in circles. A bit meant I dug so deep it'd be hard to discuss with you since you're her friend.
その簡単な全てを知りたいんです。
あなたが聞いて面白いような話はありませんよ。
大石さん、
I spoke as calmly as possible to Oishi-san, who was continuing to avoid the issue. And then I said it.
竜宮レナは怪しいと思っています。過去の事件がたとえお社様のたたりによるものだったにせよ、竜宮レナは関わっています。
レナさんが怪しいと思える具体的な証拠があるのですか？
The manner in which Oishi-san spoke became very firm. Do you have some sort of proof? That was him talking as a detective.
状況証拠だけです。
そうですか。
I could tell even over the phone how disappointed Oishi-san was. Pulling on the fishing line whenever he felt a bite, only to reel in the bait. Disappointed, but ready to cast the line once more. That's how it seemed.
大石さん、目に見える証拠がなければ動けないんですか？
What I meant was, you can't come and save me without proof. I stuck that barb in there. As Oishi-san loved roundabout ways of saying things, he understood me just fine.
大丈夫ですよ、前原さん。あなたは私が守ります。
That was not the least bit reassuring. Oishi-san was just using me to continue his investigation. I was just going to get killed, and my corpse would be an important piece of evidence. That was all I was to him.
大石さんの捜査は俺の生死と無関係でしょうが、俺は死ねば終わりなんです。
Oishi-san went silent on the other end of the line. That may have been too blunt, but I didn't care. All I needed to relay to Oishi-san was that I was currently in a very dangerous position.
だから話してください、レナのこと。サトシは転校しました。多分俺もそれほど遠くない将来、レナの言う転校をするでしょう。ですが大石さんには俺の死体を見つけることもできないでしょうね。現にサトシの死体だってまだ見つけられてない。
前原さん、どうか落ち着いて。
I was already suppressing my agitation, even without Oishi-san having to tell me. It wouldn't solve anything if I continued to scream about my mistrust in the police. It would seem that I could only depend on myself and the bat Satoshi left behind to protect me. Then I at least wanted to know about what happened before Rena transferred schools.
つまらない話になるのは覚悟の上ですね。
Oishi-san, realizing my resolve couldn't be swayed, finally caved.
今の俺にとってつまらない話は何一つありません。お願いします。
まずいくつかお断りすることがあります。
はい。
他言無用でお願いします。また内容には一部憶測も含まれているかもしれません。すべてが真実ではないかもしれないということです。よろしいですね。
真実ではないかもしれない。言ってる意味がよくわかりません。
ひなみ沢の連続開始事件は捜査本部がありません。毎年の事件は個々に扱われています。ですから竜宮レナが捜査線に浮上したことは一度もないのです。つまりですね、
レナの調査は警察としてでなく個人として行ったということですか？
ご理解いただけて助かります。 話のほとんどは電話、もしくは会って聞かせてもらったものばかりです。ですから裏が取れていません。鵜呑みにしないでほしいということなんですよ。ご理解いただけますね。
全部聞いた話だけなんですか？
ええ、申し訳ないです。個人調査ですのでね。
あれ、以前レナのカルテを見たって言いませんでしたか？確かにそう聞きましたよ。
Oishi-san paused for a moment on the other end of the line.
そんなことも言いましたかね。気のせいということにしてください。
I didn't care about Oishi-san having certain obligations and responsibilities. I also didn't care if there was no proof. Even if they were just rumors, there's no smoke without fire after all.
話してください、大石さん。
わかりました。
Oishi-san finally opened those tight lips of his. It seemed that Rena lived in Hinamizawa a long time ago. She had moved to Ibaraki Prefecture just before starting elementary school. Then, following that, right after transferring, the unfortunate incident with the breaking of the school windows happened. Then Rena confided to the doctor. It was Oyashiro-sama. This was everything I knew.
私が知る話も前原さんと大きくは変わりません。
ではどこを詳しく調べたんですか？
I didn't need to ask. It was the incident right before she transferred back to Hinamizawa.
レナが起こした事件とその後の医者での告白ですね。
はい。
大石さんはその内容を知っているからこそレナたちを疑っているんですね。
ええ、疑っています。
やはりレナたちが犯人。
ああ、いえ、疑うとはそういう意味ではないんです。
Hmm? Oishi-san was the type of person to say things with confidence, but these particular words were less than reassuring.
じゃあ何を疑ってるんですか？
親代様ですよ。
え？
親代様のたたりって本当にあるのかな、なんてまあ。
Oishi-san's laugh was quite dry, certainly not the kind that would make you want to join in. Oishi-san resumed the conversation about the dubious circumstances behind Satoshi's disappearance, the course of events leading him to delve into Rena's past. Just then, there was a thunder in the distance, and a heavy rain started pouring down. It came without warning, a downpour fiercely beating the ground. I had left the window in my room open a crack to let the heat out. The violent wind danced into my room, making the curtains flap wildly.
どうしました？
あ、いえ、急にすごい雨が。すみません。どうぞ続けてください。
I got up while still on the phone and grasped the window.
はじめに事件と申し上げましたが、学校側も被害者も告発していないので、正式には事件ではないのです。でですね、この辺りがどうも関係者皆さん口が重いんですよ。被害者の一人は片目に後遺症を残すぐらい殴られているのにもかかわらずです。学校側か、もしくは表沙汰になるのを望まない何者かがいろいろ、またカウンセリングを担当した神経科医も職業倫理に厳格な方で。もしもし、前原さん、聞こえてます？
There was the figure of a person standing by the light near the mailbox this whole time. Even in this torrential rain, they didn't have an umbrella. They were unquestionably drenched from head to toe. In this shower, which more than resembled a waterfall, droplets of water dripped down from her hair. Just standing there, both arms dangling at her side. In one hand was the stack of boxes wrapped in cloth. Her eyes focused on my room, focused on me as I was about to close the window. Her mouth was methodically repeating a chewing motion. It was as if she had something hard to chew in her mouth, with her cheeks puffing out. What could she be eating over there? How could it be that at this time I was more enthralled by Rena instead of the shocking developments being brought to light by Oishi-san? If it hadn't started raining, I wouldn't have gone to the window. Then I wouldn't have noticed Rena, nor would I have noticed that. Rena's mouth was moving in the same pattern. She wasn't eating something. She was repeating something. What was it? What was she repeating to me? What was she saying? And why was I right up against the window, fixated on her?
もしもし、前原さん、聞こえてますか？もしもーし。
ごめんなさい。
え、前原さん？
ごめんなさい。ごめんなさい。ごめんなさい。ごめんなさい。ごめんなさい。ごめんなさい。ごめんなさい。
もしもし、前原さん、どうしましたか？
Even in this torrential downpour, Rena was still apologizing. The other self inside me drew the curtain hastily with my right hand, blocking my view of the outside. But even doing that, Rena's relentless apology still reached my ears. Gomen nasai. Gomen nasai. Gomen nasai. Gomen nasai. If I forgive you for this, will you forgive me for that? Please stop. Please stop. Please stop. Please stop. Gomen nasai. 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 Damn it! Why should I have to forgive her? I'm the one who wants to be forgiven. What part of me can't you forgive? I won't be killed. If you won't forgive me, then I won't forgive you either. I won't forgive. 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 I won't forgive. Oh, sorry.
前原さん、聞こえてるなら返事をしてください。もしもーし。
My dog is in my room with me, and she was just lying down, and now that I started yelling, she picked her head up. Okay, Gracie, everything's fine. Oh, there's two. I thought there was only one tip for this one.
よく映画などに登場しますが、簡単に言うとどのようなものでしょうか？
複数の人格を持つことによる逃避と考えられています。
多重人格は逃避の一つなのですか？
さようです。そのメカニズムは完全には解明されていませんが、精神を守るために脳が行う防御行動の一つではないかと考えられています。
例えば貧乏な人がお金持ちになった自分を想像するという現実逃避ってありますよね。これも多重人格なわけですか？
極論はできませんが、講義的にはそう解釈できます。つまり誰にでもあり得る現象なのです。
その現実逃避の見境がなくなると二重人格になるのですか？
ちょっと難しいですね。そう提唱する説もありますし、否定する説もあります。諸説紛々です。
では精神医学の世界ではまだ多重人格というのは未知の解明されていない現象なんですか？
残念ながらそうなります。今後の研究が期待されます。
でも二重人格なんてなんだかかっこいいですよね。どういう人が二重人格になれるんですか？
なれると言いますか、なりやすいと言いますか、 最近の研究では遺伝と死因が複雑に絡み合い、中でも幼少期の育児体験が大きく作用するのではないかと言われています。
そういえばこの A 君も家庭に問題を抱えてるんですよね。気の毒に7つの人格を持つ青年 A。 では VTR の続きをどうぞ。ですがその前にコマーシャル。
She doesn't seem to care too much about tact. Anyway, time for the last tip. The seventh mart was a bargain supermarket with food and alcohol. What's this, Keiichi? So many. There's no reason to get all the different kinds, is there? I flopped all the different colored cup ramen bowls into the cart.
最近のカップ麺は凝ってて種類も多いんだよ。どれも一通りは食ってみたいし。
I knew it was pretty selfish of me, but I thought I'd at least give it a try. Keiichi. Buy them in the big case. It's cheaper. Dad faltered. I had a feeling it'd end up like this. Now that Dad has thrown his hat into the ring, I'd have to compromise.
それじゃあ一種類しか食えないよ。飽きちゃうって。
I was resisting as a formality. I had already given up inside and wasn't sure which case of ramen to get. If you can't pick, then Mommy will pick for you. You don't have to rush me. I quickly searched the cases of ramen for what I want. So, I could just say noodles, but it's ramen, so I'm gonna say ramen. Pork, bone, and ginger? Large cup? Hey, Keiichi, can't you get a more normal one? If I let Mom pick, she'd err on the side of safety and get soy sauce or salt flavored. So when I plonked a large box of pork bone flavor in the shopping cart, Mom looked back at me with an expression as if to say, "These ones?" To show her this was my last compromise, I began explaining the choice.
豚骨はうまいんだよ。大盛りだけど大味ってわけじゃないし。
I remembered insisting that the noodles I picked were the right kind. Damn it. In this frozen memory in time, this encapsulated world, I didn't have the power to look around my surroundings. So, I did what I could and reached out with my hearing and vision, sharpening my senses to find the presence I overlooked. No matter how much I searched through my field of vision, I couldn't see Rena. I rewound the situation, searching. But of course, I couldn't find her. Then, was she spying at me from my blind spot? Oh. My mouth is acting up. God damn it. Anyway, I'll just use the enter key. I go through the sound and presences again, looking. I could see the other customers. I could sense the other customers. They were all mixed about, moving as they pleased. There was nobody looking over this way, and no one trying to get behind me. Not here. Couldn't be here. Probably wasn't here. I would definitely notice if someone was right behind me, even when I wasn't on my guard. I smiled wryly at the thought of using a vague word like probably right before contradicting it with definitely. Then, I paused my mental replay as a chill ran down my spine. There was definitely a presence like a shadow behind me. That was a terror unlike any other. If a presence really had manifested behind me, I would definitely have turned around to check for it. But the world had moved on, and there was no way for me to turn around. While carrying that frightening shadow on my back, I was gleefully running around the store searching for a case of ramen. running through the instant ramen section, bad-mouthing my mom. But there was that presence constantly at my back, sticking to me like a shadow. No way to see what it was. Realizing it now after the fact was horrifying and repulsive. In that moment of time, I was running around gleefully, carrying that cardboard box. Tip-tap. But I listened to that moment again. I could hear footsteps other than mine going pit-pat with every step. Tip-tap, tip-tap, tip-tap. Pit-pat, pit-pat, pit-pat. Tip-tap, tip-tap. Pit-pat, pit-pat. Tip-tap, tip-tap. Pit-pat, pit-pat. While I was running, the sound of those barefoot footsteps going pit-pat were right behind mine. Me running around gleefully in that closed-off moment in time. But I didn't hear it. No, I heard it. That's why I remembered it. I didn't think I had heard anything. That's why I didn't turn around. That is why I didn't turn around. In that moment, the pit-pat of those footsteps were following me the entire time. I couldn't run faster and escape. I couldn't run any faster than I had ran at the time. I couldn't turn around. I hadn't turned around before, not once. Then I returned to my parents and started talking. The shadow-like presence was right at my back. Since I didn't move, the shadow didn't move. That is why it made no sound. That was all. At that time, I hadn't taken a single step while talking with my parents. I was just standing there. This was undeniable. And yet, I heard it. A pit-pat. That shouldn't be. If I took 3 steps, it followed 3 steps. Wasn't that the rule? There was no sound other than that. At that time, the entire world had gone dark. A sudden darkness. It was the end of my reflective journey. I was tired. I wanted to end it. Someone turned on the light. Except my body couldn't move. As if I was sewn into that moment in time. Pit-pat. My past self's hair stood on end. That's impossible. Now that's just breaking the rules. I haven't moved. So you shouldn't be moving either. I couldn't move. So you shouldn't be able to move either. Follow the rules. Pit-pat. Yet that sound echoed in the darkness once again. The hair on the back of my neck pricked up on end. It was so close that it was hard to tell whether it was touching the hair or not. Why couldn't I move? Like how the presence was moving behind me. I quickly realized I could move. It's just that I was scared and didn't want to. But now was the only time I could turn around. There was something unforgivable in this moment in time. But I needed to turn around immediately. As if my entire being was trying to force me to stop, it began to administer a pain like a needle being stuck into my every pore. I'll turn around. I'll turn around. I'm not scared at all. I'll turn around. I'll turn around. I'm not scared at all. A scream I was unable to vocalize. Ah! I turned around. At first, I couldn't understand the meaning of it. What is this? Just as a person's mouth might bite into an apple, slurp the juices, and finally discover that it was an apple, my mind began to process the scene before my eyes by eating the apple. Munch, munch, chew, chew. Slurp the juices and discover the apple. Meaning, what was in front of me was... Ah! Oh god, I'm sorry. You okay, Gracie? You okay, puppy? It's okay. Tristan's fine. Ah, my throat hurts. You're probably gonna hear that in the next part. Okay, let's save this thing. So next episode is gonna be the last chapter. This one was over 2 hours, and can't remember, but the next one might be even longer. I don't know, but I will see you all then. Take care.